Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Friday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great. And yeah, football happened last night, so we got some snap counts to finally talk about and plenty more goodness on the way because very special guest joining us here on the Fantasy Life Show this Friday. You know him on the Twitter sphere as CoachSpeakIndex. In real life, it is our man, the myth, the legend, Greg Brainos. Again, you can find all of his fantastic work on Twitter at CoachSpeakIndex. He also has a cool patreon.com/CoachSpeakIndex for some good rankings and things like that. So, Greg, let me be the first of many fantasy, quote unquote analysts to say thank you for everything you do. And thanks for coming on the show, man.
Dude, thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it. Can't wait to talk ball.
Just two guys talking ball. It's August 9th. It's Friday. We got more football on the way. So, yeah, let's talk some freaking ball. The news. Again, guys, actual pre-season takeaways. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to our Fantasy Life Plus premium product. Guys, if you do want to try to take that next step in your fantasy, just repertoire. Again, we got some free content, the show, the articles, everything like that. But that extra step, the consensus rankings, having a cheat sheet, having our draft champion tool to help do some cool customizable mock drafts, Fantasy Life Plus might just be the product for you. So check it out. Again, tier 2 subscription still costs less than a Chipotle burrito per month. Not too shabby in this economy, no less. So Fantasy Life Plus, check it out. Now time for the real news. And Greg, again, look, preseason football, we don't really care about the final scores. For those that were wondering, Patriots 17, Panthers 3, Giants 14, Lions 3. You will never guess what two teams I decide to throw into an ill-advised money line parlay. We will watch the film and get better on that one. But we did get some good first team depth chart takeaways, starting off with a Patriots wide receiver room that, if you've been paying attention to just practice reports out of New England, really did seem like it was led by Jalen Polk. That said, didn't come in until the second drive, and fellow upstart rookie Javon Baker actually was not in until the fourth drive of the second quarter when all the veterans were already done. So, Greg, it's not exactly a new phenomenon to see rookies not exactly, get full first team reps out of the starting gate, but guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, KJ Osborne, Tyquan Thornton were getting the starting run. I mean, again, all the good vibes out of Patriots camp, I feel like, have been centered around Polk and Baker. Is this concerning for you? Is this just basic, game one of the preseason, nothing to really worry about?
I mean, it's a little bit concerning, especially with Mayo recently talking about Javon Baker and, in practice, he makes some mistakes. He made a big catch, spiked the ball without getting touched, classic Plaxico Burris move there. And, that's something that he has to fix, he said. So who knows if it's related to those kinds of things, like really, really making him earn it. We've heard that he's more of a developmental receiver, obviously, than Jalen Polk. I have quite a few Javon Baker bags in best ball. He's someone that I'm hoping will hit down the stretch. I don't know if he'll be a starter immediately.
And look, there was one deep ball. I believe it would have been Bailey Zappi that threw that one, where Baker did have some separation on the outside, better pass. Maybe we're talking about a new and improved performance. Also did have a nice contested catch on the sideline on a play that got called back on a holding penalty, I believe. So not all doom and gloom for Javon Baker, but to Greg's point, yeah, it hasn't exactly been one completely positive piece after another. And sometimes, guys, as much as we do love training camp highlights, you got to remember the coaches have a bit more clear the whole situation than we do. So keep an eye on what's going on in New England, because again, this is what Kendrick Bourne and Demario Douglas not even playing. Bourne obviously still coming back from the ACL. Pop Douglas having a bit of a hand issue and also just being probably the number one there. So no big time use in getting him out there. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, for now, would expect to see Jalen Polk again in these three wide receiver sets sooner rather than later. Javon Baker, maybe that guy where just an 18th round pick anyway, but certainly needs to start climbing that depth chart in a hurry. Elsewhere, we had the Giants. Really, guys, probably the biggest fantasy takeaway from yesterday was the fact that Giants rookie running back Tyron Tracy does seem cemented as the RB2. Now, I get it. The highlights go to Eric Gray. And hey, he had a great day out there. 4 carries, 52 yards, 2 touchdowns, had another 4 receptions for 46 yards. But Greg, in terms of looking at the first team offense, which was led by Drew Lock, Daniel Jones, obviously the starter, but getting some rest. But Tyron Tracy, man, 11 of 13 snaps with the starters. And to be fair, he didn't look like, this wide converted running back from wide receiver out there managed to force 4 missed tackles on his 5 carries per PFF and look good. So, Greg, I mean, again, it's been hard trying to figure out some of these depth charts, but I know in recent days we've seen some Giants beat reporters talk about both Tyron Tracy and Theo Johnson getting some legit, not starter reps, but kind of carving. Theo Johnson was getting starter reps. Tracy really carving out that RB2 role behind Devin Singletary. Pretty nice data point here. Now, could it change because Eric Gray did good? Sure. But again, we're used to seeing rookies playing behind the veterans in the first week of the preseason. So to see Tracy already past that, that's good news for a guy that I think we should be drafting as a pretty nice handcuff at the end of drafts.
Yeah, he looked legit last night, and people once Eric Gray started touching the ball were like, oh my God, Eric Gray. I still think it's Tyrone Tracy in the post game press conference. Dable was asked about Eric Gray. He was like, yeah, he's gotten stronger throughout camp. He made a couple nice plays tonight, like really kind of almost downplaying that performance from him. But the concern that people had about Tyrone Tracy was, oh yeah, he's only played running back 1 year. How's he going to look at the NFL level at running back? And the answer was like, okay, he looks pretty decent.
Yeah, again, I'm not trying to completely freak out about it. I mean, I'm looking up his totals right now. Again, guys, no team scored more than 17 points. So, shocker, we're not going to see some big, fantasy-friendly performances. But, yeah, Tracy, 5 carries, 26 yards on those. And, again, several occasions where he was at least breaking an arm tackle or two. So, a lot of times with, a player like Tracy, you worry that you're going to get someone just bouncing every single run outside, maybe not looking the part of being sturdy enough to hold up in pass pro. But at least for one day, Tyron Tracy did continue to draft him alongside guys like Braylon Allen again towards the end of your fantasy drafts. And yeah, I think you might just find yourself with a pretty fantasy friendly handcuff. Giants wide receivers, again, didn't have much production to go around, but we did have Malik Neighbors obviously starting and getting his NFL debut. No targets, which is kind of lame, but did, I think, intriguingly, Greg, play 11 of his 12 snaps on the outside. So we have Neighbors on the outside, where this was a situation coming out of LSU where people wondered if he was going to be more of this slot merchant. But to me, Neighbors playing on the outside is key because Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton rested would presumably indicate that Jalen Hyatt is going to be the odd man out in this 3 wide receiver core. So now I don't want to get carried away and expect Daniel Jones to be enabling more than one, overly fantasy relevant wide receiver. But Greg, it does seem like, again, when we're in the final rounds of fantasy drafts, Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton looking like the next man up behind Neighbors for now.
Yeah, I've taken a lot of Wan'Dale Robinson in best ball, and the speculation recently in training camp has been that it's Jalen Hyatt that's going to be running with the ones, and Darius Slayton is the odd man out. So that was pretty interesting last night on Neighbors. Man, has anyone ever gotten more separation and not been thrown the ball than Malik Neighbors on that one play last night? Good Lord, he was open by like 20 yards.
Yeah.
Incredible.
That was the interception, right? I mean, look, I've been a Drew Lock stan for a long time, but when I saw him, just try to force that ball over the middle, I literally groaned, and the producers were like, "What's wrong, Ian?"
Wow.
So, not the best performance for my guy Drew Lock, and then he also got a hip injury, but hurt, not injured, allegedly could have returned to the game. So, very much still in on Malik Neighbors. I know our own Peter Overset also listed Neighbors as one of his guys for this year. I love him. Dwayne McFarland loves him. What could go wrong when every single fantasy guy seems to agree on one player? But again, guys, Wan'Dale Robinson really is standing out as one of those fellow, late round wide receivers to maybe throw a dart at. So final point with the Giants, again, pretty wide open depth chart, at least at, certain spots of the offense. And the tight end room has gotten, some words recently because Theo Johnson, literally one of the most athletic tight ends that we have seen come into the league ever, I think his relative athletic score is literally top 10 in the entire database that stretches back to 1987. So he was out there with the starters, but 7 of 13 snaps, where Daniel Bellinger also had 7 of 13. Chris Manhurst was out there for 6 of 13 and more of a block first role. So Theo did lead it in overall routes, 5 versus 3 compared to Bellinger, but 5 routes on 9 dropbacks, not going to quite get the job done. So Greg, what have you kind of, again, just been getting from this tight end situation? Because it does does seem like Theo is possibly in the lead. I mean, we saw him yesterday. He is in the lead in terms of the first receiving option, but looks like it still might be a committee. And in fantasy football land, if you are rotating multiple tight ends, usually pretty tough to even get one overly fantasy relevant one out of it.
Yeah, well, and obviously it's tougher for rookie tight ends to kind of, learn the position and really get into the swing of things. So I I'm not gonna freak out over the first preseason game. I'll kind of wait and see what the usage is going to be in game 2 and in game 3. If we're still at these numbers game 3, then okay, then I'm starting to maybe sweat a little bit, as much as you can sweat over a guy that you're taking in the final round. Obviously, we don't want zeros there, but there's room for him to displace Bellinger.
When I'm talking about a lot of these guys like a Theo Johnson, who no, you guys are not drafting, but I try to think of it more in the context, like if we do get the week 1 data point of them being a full-time player, could they be someone that's, on the cover of all the waiver wire articles coming out there in week 2? And with tight ends, we typically want to see a route rate, north of 70 or so percent, 5 out of 9, not quite getting us there. So Theo Johnson, again, you're taking him in the very last round. Okay. It's hard for anyone to overly hate on that sort of pick, but might need to pump the brakes a little bit in deep leagues, because again, it does seem like probably more of a committee. So final, somewhat marquee note here, Greg, is going to be the Detroit Lions wide receiver room, because this is a reigning top 5 ranked scoring offense that we all expect to be really good again. We got Jared Goff under center. I mean, this should be the sort of team that can enable multiple, pass catchers who we really like in fantasy. And of course, we have Sun God. Of course, we have Sam Laporta, and people are getting behind Jameson Williams. But that wide receiver 3 spot remains pretty wide open. And it seems like, based on, again, the fact that Khalif Raymond got to rest alongside the Sun God and JMO, that he could be the front runner. Now, Khalif Raymond, undersized. He's also a veteran, 29 or 30, I believe, at this point. So he's also the type of guy who, regardless of if he is a starting wide receiver 3 or not, might have just been getting the night off to begin with. But Darius Fountain, Antoine Green, the primary wide receivers throughout the first half. Donovan Peoples-Jones, actually seemingly the odd man out, did not see his first snap until the end of the first half. So, Greg, I've been trying to dig through some of these Lions reports, and they were almost indicating that Fountain, Colts legend Darius Fountain, as I've found out on Twitter, but they've actually noticed that, he's been the one almost being called the front runner for that wide receiver 3 job. How do you see this breaking out, or is the most likely answer just a rotation between the guys?
Yeah, the offensive coordinator Ben Johnson talked about the wide receiver 3 battle recently. I've got it up on my Twitter timeline somewhere, and yeah, they just want. I mean, they'd like for someone to grab it, but the reality is it might very well be multiple guys. They have talked up Darius Fountain quite a bit this offseason, and they've also said, both Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell, that Khalif Raymond is going to be a big part of the offense this season. Now, big part is kind of relative, right? It's not
Yeah.
Amon-Ra St. Brown big. It's, he'll he'll get some run. He'll get a lot of run this year. They like him quite a bit, but they also do want kind of a bigger, rangier guy at that position.
Yeah, that was the comment. I'm sure you tweeted out, and that's where I saw it. Because again, I go through your Twitter every freaking day, man. Everything you say, Greg, I'm consuming at some point. Again, great account at CoachSpeakIndex. But the point that they want this bigger, larger guy, I thought it was a good sign for Donovan Peoples-Jones, and just one preseason game, but certainly seems to be the odd man out for now. And yeah, 5'9", 162-pound Khalif Raymond might just be, again, always kind of stuck in that sort of gadgety role, even if he does continue to make the most out of his opportunities when given the chance. So again, preseason action. It is just a preseason, but I'll take it over no football 8 days of the week. So gotta appreciate that. Final notes just from, again, observing the games and some of the stats that went with them. Joe Milton and Hendon Hooker, shout out Vols Nation, looked fairly solid with their second half opportunities. The Panthers didn't really play anyone of note other than Jonathan Mingo, who dropped his only target. Again, mentioned Drew Lock being hurt, not injured. They said he probably could have come back into the game. Kayshon Boutte, only player to clear 50 receiving yards on the slate. Kind of tells you how the offense was going overall. We'll note the Panthers, 38.9% pressure rate allowed, Giants, 36.7%. I mean, these are both bottom 4 units last year, and they didn't exactly look all that improved at protecting their quarterback. And finally, just one interesting note, the Giants had a 46% play action rate yesterday. I mean, the league high mark last year was 31%. So when we are trying to look at some of the sharper offenses in the NFL and, things their play callers are doing to help them out, play action and also, pre-snap shift in motion are two of the primary indicators that, again, we just see teams like the Lions, like the Dolphins, really just ranking towards the top of the league more years than not. So Brian Daboll, someone who I do think is a pretty good mind, could hopefully be putting the Giants in a position to help overcome that aforementioned pretty meh offensive line. So not trying to take too much away, but pretty interesting there. And guess what? We'll be back on Monday morning breaking down a hell of a lot more takeaways from that. So that was the preseason. Now I'm going to quickly run through some other takeaways from, around the NFL. And then Greg and I will get into some juicy position battles to keep an eye out for tomorrow and throughout the rest of the preseason. So first of all, we'll note that Joe Buscaglia, ace Bills beat writer, set on Mac Hollins. Barring injury, Hollins should be a locked-in top 4 receiver who will likely get more offensive snaps than initially expected. He can play both the X and Z receiver positions. So seemingly primary competition for Keon Coleman. Greg and I are going to be talking more about this situation here in just a bit. The 49ers did indeed sign Robbie Chosen, formerly Robbie Anderson, formerly Robbie with a slightly different spelling of Robbie Anderson. So yeah, he's now with the 49ers. Good for him. 2 Colts tight ends that have played the most with the first team, Mo Alley-Cox and Kylan Granson. My guy Jelani Woods is mostly working with the second team. So not ideal there for bag holders of Jelani. And final note, Tucker Kraft already starting over Luke Musgrave in the Packers walkthrough. Still think it'll be a committee of sorts, but yeah, that torn pec apparently, is pretty much in the rearview mirror at this point. Tucker Kraft, one of the better, late, like literally last round tight end picks alongside our guy Theo Johnson. Injuries, Rondale Moore officially out for the season with that knee. Absolutely sucks. Look for Ray McLeod to step up as the Falcons starting slot. Christian Watson and Jaden Reed both back at practice after having various scares the day before. Good to see there. And Deontay Foreman is back at practice after, again, being stretchered off the field last week. So great news for Foreman. And yeah, happy retirement, Nick Foles. Jameis Winston on Deshaun Watson said you can knick-knack this, that, patty whack, give a dog a bone. Deshaun Watson is going to turn it on. Thank you for being you, Jameis. And then finally, Jerry Jones on the CeeDee Lamb talks. We're getting great work done and making real progress. I don't think we're losing a step with where we are now, yet has no urgency. So CeeDee Lamb decided to, put his opinion out there, quote tweeted that and just said LOL. So CeeDee Lamb, Cowboys Nation, would be a lot cooler if you got signed soon. But that's the news, everyone. And we got some cool stuff ahead. But first, a quick word from our friends over at DraftKings. Guys, whether you've been watching your favorite team from the screen at home or the ballpark in the stands, there's an even better way to get in on the action. Check out our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers who bet $5 will instantly get $150 back in bonus bets. All you got to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our code FantasyLife. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. They still have awesome selections of DFS games. And my personal favorite, their Best Ball Streets, which myself and Fantasy Life's own Dwayne McFarland will be exploring here actually after the show around 10:30 this very morning. So you can check out the replay on the Fantasy Life YouTube channel if you are so inclined. But yeah, otherwise, guys, again, new customers, $5 instantly will get $150 back in bonus bets. Just download DraftKings Sportsbook app and use our code FantasyLife. And remember, the crown is yours. All right, Greg, so we were talking a little bit before the show. I did not know that you are, someone that actually lives in France for the majority of the year, which is really freaking cool. Columbus, Ohio, not quite as cool as that going on. So I know you are in the States at the moment, really just trying to get in on some of that best ball mania underdog action. Shout out to the fine folks over there. But again, man, when I look over and just see your Twitter, it seems like you're grinding every single press conference out there. And accordingly, you're able to get, again, just some of the just better tidbits that a lot of people are maybe missing if they're only reading the highlights from an article. So just talk about your general process and like how important you found Coach Speak to actual, fantasy football, just rankings and overall playing, because I know a lot of people that are reporting on this stuff don't necessarily play fantasy football as much as you do. So it's great to see someone, again, actually not only, find this stuff, but then also put it into action with your own bankroll as well.
Yeah, the process on a daily basis is I just watch every single head coach, offensive coordinator, and general manager press conference, which now getting into this time of the season and all the way through the end of the regular season, it's about 40 hours of press conferences per week. And yeah, so I'll clip all the pertinent clips, all the really huge stuff, and put that online. And then there's a lot of other notes during the press conferences that's important as well. But I just can't put every single thing on the Twitter, so I put all those notes into the private Coach Speak Index Discord, and just keep a running log for every team's press conference. Have a separate thread for every team, so you can, go through there and look and see what the Lions have been saying about Dory's Fountain for the last month or so. Just really important to get these full pictures, right? This is the age of shortened, aggregated headlines, and
Yeah.
so often we can just be misled by those. So I preach that context is king just all the time. Like, we give us the full picture. Okay. It may take us an extra 30 seconds to hear everything that was said, but that's so important in fantasy football that we get a clear, full picture of, every player's situation, and what the coaches think about these people. When we're playing fantasy football, like, this is just a giant puzzle that we're trying to put together, and there's a bunch of pieces. There's so many more pieces than the puzzle that we're actually putting together, and we have to pick out the right ones. And the coaches and offensive coordinators and GMs are like hinting, hey, this piece over here, you might want to pick this piece up and use it because it's going to fit. So that's kind of what I'm doing with the Coach Speak Index. For years we were just moving around in the dark, and now the Coach Speak Index is brought some light and illuminated the situation. So yeah, enough of those misleading headlines. Let's find out what's actually being said, and actionable information.
No, it's 100% right where we get this. For example, a coach says a running back has 3 down ability and plays a big role. And it's like, it was like the Tyler Algier thing from a couple weeks ago. He's going to play a big role
Yeah,
for us. Well, it was also a question
it's relative.
specifically about Tyler Algier, where right before that, they spoke about Bijan plenty.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's like also John Harbaugh saying Justice Hill is a starting caliber running back, and all the headlines were Justice Hill starting running back. Okay, that's not exactly what he said, and he did say Justice Hill is going to play a lot this year, and that makes sense because Justice Hill played a lot last year, and they're not going to have Derrick Henry in on 100% of the snaps. They trust Justice Hill. They like Justice Hill. He's going to play a lot of snaps. Let's not go crazy. Like, again, let's listen to the entire thing
Yeah.
that's being said. With the Tyler Algier situation, he said he has a defined role, right? It's dependent upon the situation. There will be times where we really ride him. Okay, well, when does that make sense? Probably when they're salting away a lead, right?
Yeah.
He's a hammer back. Now, I could absolutely see him taking some of the goal line work from Bijan because he is just such a sturdy, reliable back there in short yardage. But I mean, people just love to overreact, and thinking that this is going to be some sort of 50-50 split is just crazy.
The scars are still so fresh from the Arthur Smith experience. I
It
think
would be
everyone
the
is.
funniest thing that could happen in fantasy football this year is for Tyler Algier to get like 48% of carries.
Oh gosh, don't put it in the universe, Greg. Better be knocking on some wood. But who is your least favorite team or coach to kind of have to get through, and why is it Jim Harbaugh and the Los Angeles Chargers?
Dude, I actually love Jim Harbaugh. He is
He's funny.
so funny to me. This ongoing bit of where he says he's not qualified to relay medical information is just so funny, man. And he's completely committed to the bit. I love it. My least favorite coach to watch their press conference is probably Sean McDermott.
Mm,
Just really, really boring, never gives us really any information at all. Just a complete drag to watch. And a lot of his press conferences will be like 30 minutes. It's like, oh no,
oof.
I'll never get this
Yeah,
time back.
I know Dennis Allen with the Saints as well. I guess he does give some entertainment. It's just kind of this weird entertainment where he's almost like hating on his own players half the time, it seems like. So, yeah, guys,
Yeah.
please tell us more depth chart takeaways. I know the fantasy community would appreciate it. But great stuff. Let's get into some actual, position battles going on and hopefully try to get a bit closer to what's happening. Because again, you mentioned just really you do this all year long. So one thing I like that you do a lot is, hey, a coach, okay, says this nice thing about Marshawn Lloyd, for example. And then it's not just this one quote. You're actually able to say, well, he said this yesterday, but he also said something similar in May. And guess what? He also said something similar in March. And that's when we get that constant drumbeat that, again, can help us feel a bit better about, a takeaway from a specific coach. So looking at the Steelers and, really the most talked about quarterback competition in the NFL right now, if it is a competition, some beat reporters have varying opinions on that. But Justin Fields versus Russell Wilson, the constant drumbeat has here actually been in favor of Russell Wilson. I mean, ever since Fields got, traded for back in March, it has been Russell Wilson in pole position as starter. Tomlin even coming out recently and saying, okay, the depth chart was real. Russ is our QB1. Do you think this is a real competition, or I mean, like, what percentage odds I would say, like, would you put our Russ being the week one starter? Because as much as the Columbus, Ohio, in me and the fantasy guy in me wants Fields to win the job, I still think that in the heart of hearts of Tomlin and Arthur Smith, they probably want Russ, just a steadier veteran hand, to be that guy, at least to start the season. But again, it just I'm basing that on just hearing most of them saying throughout the year that it has been Russ. What are your feelings on the situation?
If I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say it's probably like 70% Russ
Okay.
to start week one. Tomlin, first of all, not reliable on depth chart coach speak, so we can't really hang on to whatever he said. He has said, like you mentioned, that Russell Wilson is in pole position, but he has also stated, yeah, this is absolutely a competition. So if Justin Fields goes out there and really tears it up during the preseason, then there's a possibility that we see him as the starter week one.
Certainly would be a lot cooler for fantasy. Only Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow have averaged more fantasy points per game than Fields over these past two seasons. I mean, look, he's starting to go earlier in these underdog drafts. I mean, it wasn't that long ago where you could actually get Fields in round 18, which was fantastic. But Greg, like, if we had to look at underdog, players right now and just say who has the best chance of literally, cutting their ADP in half between now and week one, I think Justin Fields is probably that guy.
Yeah, absolutely he is. If we get word that he's the starter, I mean, he's going to be going in what the like seventh round, eighth round,
I
maybe.
think so.
Man, yeah, right around the like C.J. Stroud, Joe Burrow area.
That'd be a little aggressive, but it would take 1 week. Like if he turns in a top five performance in week one, then yeah, that's exactly where we're ranking him, as early as week two. So if Fields does win the job, now let's face it, Russ is still there for the time being. I don't think he'd have the longest leash in the world. But if you had to pick the better up case scenario between the two, Fields these last 2 years, QB5, QB11 in fantasy points per game, Russ, QB18 and QB13. So guys, like Desmond Ritter, one thing I think the entire fantasy community can agree, sucks at football. And he had 6 top 12 finishes last year just by virtue of being a pretty good athlete. And Arthur Smith, say what you want about the guy, does know how to produce a fairly efficient rushing attack. We've seen that more years than not, even in the post, Derrick Henry Falcons era, if you will, over there. So keep an eye on it. But you heard from Greg about a 70% chance that Russ starts. I agree with that speculation for now. Rest of the quarterback battles going on consist of some first-round rookies. We got Drake May competing with Jacoby Brissett, J.J. McCarthy behind Sam Darnold for the time being, and Bo Nix out there in Denver, seemingly just against Jarrett Stidham at this point, with all due respect to Zach Wilson. So, Greg, looking at these rookies, again, May, McCarthy, and Nix, who do you think winds up spending the most time on the bench?
Well, just to like reverse engineer it, I think Bo Nix spends the least time on the bench. Like he probably ends up starting week 1 or very, very early on. And then it's probably JJ McCarthy that spends the most time on the bench. Like they brought in Sam Darnold as, very obviously this kind of bridge quarterback. And I just feel like they have more of a structure in place where, Sam Darnold can be more productive and help the team a little more early on than Jacoby Brissett can with the Patriots.
Hmm.
So it's just a matter of like, what are these teams' records after the first 5 or 6 games? If if the Patriots start off 1-4, we might see Drake May pretty early there. Number 3 overall pick. And then for the Vikings, they have a week 6 bye. They're getting TJ Hawkinson back probably week 7, maybe a little bit earlier, but I feel pretty good that he will be back by week 7. So that would be a pretty nice time to bring in JJ McCarthy if they're 2-3 or 1-4 or something like that. It's just a matter of like, when do these coaches feel like these guys are actually ready? Because that's really big for Gerard Mayo and for Kevin O'Connell. They're not going to throw these guys out to the wolves if they feel like they're not ready for NFL action.
Initially, I was thinking it might be May being the one spending the longest on the bench because I had looked at this Vikings, schedule start, and it's literally the Giants. Okay, fine, they can maybe get a win there. But then 49ers, Texans, Packers, and Jets before their week 6 bye. So I'm with you. It would make sense if, again, we see week 7 be the JJ McCarthy start. With Drake May, I didn't know if it was, setting up that tough to start the season. And oh yeah, it's actually probably more brutal for the Patriots. They are at the Bengals week 1, home against the Seahawks, at the Jets, at the 49ers, and then they get to come back home to face the Dolphins and Texans in the first 6 weeks of the season. So honestly, I'd be surprised if we're hitting mid-October and we don't see both of those guys under center. Far more top 10 picks wind up starting at least 10 games as rookies than not. So yeah, we do have the Patrick Mahomes of the world, but let's face it, that was on a Chiefs team that was still, contending to win the AFC West year in and year out under Alex Smith. Don't exactly think we can compare that to the Patriots and, to a slightly lesser extent, the Vikings as well. So keep an eye on those. Drake May certainly does profile as the most fantasy friendly quarterback of the group. You look at what he did his last 2 years at North Carolina. I mean, 57 rushing yards per game. That's more than what Justin Fields had during his final 2 years at Ohio State. Anthony Richardson of Florida, 59 rushing yards per game. So not saying that Drake's, rushing ability is going to translate to the next level quite as well as those guys, but certainly someone that was 17 games we could see getting the 300, 400 rushing yards, handful of touchdowns, sure adds up in a hurry in fantasy land. So good stuff on the quarterbacks. Now, Greg, one of the, most gripping kind of position battles that maybe, and you can talk about this, maybe isn't even so much of a position battle as in terms of just trying to figure out what the committee split's going to be, but it's the Cincinnati Bengals backfield. No more Joe Mixon, which matters because, my God, Joe Mixon had 270 plus touches in 5 of the last 6 years. So all sorts of opportunity on the table for Zach Moss and or Chase Brown for now. Please, fantasy guys, do not let Samaje Perine find his way back to Cincy to ruin what at least looks like a 2-back committee for the time being. So, again, Greg, it's one of these things where it seemed like to me Chase Brown was getting most of the love throughout training camp, but then unofficial depth chart comes out and gives Zach Moss the rub. We also had some more recent comments saying that Moss has been doing a good job as well. How do you see this split shaking out? And do you think there's been enough love for Chase Brown for him to be, a poor man's Jahmyr Gibbs or Devin Achane versus a rich man's, Jaleel McLaughlin or a Marshawn Lloyd, where we have more concerns about him getting that featured role? How do you see this shaking out?
Well, I think one thing is pretty clear is that Chase Brown is going to have a much, much bigger role this season. Zach Taylor has said as much. He said there's going to be a big emphasis on his role this year. And Zach Taylor, while he's not honest on injury coach speak, he does have an 85% reliability rating on usage and workload coach speak. So definitely expect a big jump in usage for him. And Zach Taylor also said, I think he's earned that. I think he has worked the right way. They asked him to, in the offseason, work on his pass catching chops, which by all accounts he has done. They see him as a very explosive element in the offense. I think they would like for it to be a 50-50 split, but if there's room for any one running back in this backfield to take over, it's probably Chase Brown. Like we didn't get to see a ton of them last season, but like we know what Zach Moss is. Zach Moss is not going to be someone who takes like real command, like 75%, 80% bell cow kind of situation in this backfield. Like Chase Brown will be a thing this year. It's just a matter of what percentage of the work is he going to get. If he just like really goes off in the first few weeks, can you keep running a 50-50 split with these two?
I kind of had this epiphany yesterday where, as much as we want to say, like, okay, well, who profiles more like Joe Mixon? Well, with the pass blocking chops and just being more of the early down grinder, you could argue that it is Zach Moss. But honestly, with some of the things Moss brings to the table, maybe he's just going to be more of that, Samaje Perine version from those former Bengals teams. Because you look at that, man, and yes, it was the Joe Mixon show, but 2020, Perine had 74 touches. 2021, he had 82. 2022, he had 133, where if you looked at those snap rates, it actually was a lot closer to 50-50, 60-40 than you might expect given the touch counts. But obviously Mixon was the guy we wanted in fantasy because he's the one touching the football more times than not. But that's fine. And in the year 2024, everyone, we can live with two running back committees. Just gets complicated when we get 3 or 4 guys involved, like potentially those Broncos and Packers backfields I mentioned. So Chase Brown, 5'10", 209 pounds. I mean, the dude had 25 plus touches in 8 of his final 12 games in college. So I don't think there's too big of a concern about him being able to handle that workload. Yeah, he has turned into, guys, arguably the target for zero RB drafters out there. I think the floor is looking pretty solid. And, I don't want to get too carried away, but I'll let Peter Overset get carried away for me. He said Chase Brown is this year's Devin Achane in terms of just being able to make the absolute most out of his opportunities. And hey, the only running back faster than Devin Achane last year per next gen stats was Chase Brown. So not the worst comp in the world. I will keep trying to draft a hell of a lot more than I have earlier in the offseason. Give me all the Chase Brown for now. Greg, the other backfield that people have been paying a ton of attention to is out there in Dallas. And got an interesting note from a New York Times John Machado here yesterday, actually, where he said, at this point, it would be surprising for Dowdle not to make the roster. Yes, that would be surprising. But he also said Dowdle has to be the favorite to lead the team in rushing at this point. So I think when the Cowboys signed Ezekiel Elliott, a lot of us just assumed he'd be walking back into the starter's role. And I do think he'll be plenty involved. The pass pro remains great. And just in terms of short yardage situations, Zeke is very good at that job still. It was just not good when those were the two things he was good at, and you're making $90 million on a contract. Now 1 year, $3 million, a bit easier to stomach that, I think, for Cowboys Nation. So Rico Dowdle, man, someone that you think actually could be taking the lead here, because it seems like, from Royce Freeman to some Deuce Vaughn slot wide receiver stuff, I feel like McCarthy and kind of the coach speak coming out of Dallas has been all over the place.
Well, they have said that this is going to be running back by committee. They're very comfortable with it. McCarthy said whether it's 2 or 3 guys, it's going to be running back by committee. And he said that Rico Dowdle is one of the lead guys there. I'm buying the hype that he is the best running back in Dallas right now. If he can fade another running back being brought in, I'm not worried about Royce Freeman when they're talking about him. They're always bringing up his special teams role as well, which is not great for his prospective usage as a running back. So yeah, I'm definitely in on Rico Dowdle as, especially at a cheaper ADP than where Zeke is going right now. And if Rico Dowdle ends up getting goal line work, like we're all expecting, Zeke to get, then man, that pays off that ADP really, really nicely. And you have him in some zero RB builds,
Yeah.
as like your running back 3. or your running back 4. I mean, that feels really nice.
And again, I've stressed this before with our ADP tool over at Fantasy Life, where sometimes it can be as easy as just kind of looking across the board and seeing one specific site has a guy drastically underpriced compared to everyone else. And it's like, yeah, he's probably a value. And Rico Dowdle is one of those guys, everyone. I mean, ESPN pick 166 overall, Sleeper 148, Yahoo 132. And then on the FFPCs, NFFCs, the higher stakes sites of the world, we're seeing him in the low 140s. So that's another guy, man, where we said it earlier, Justin Fields really could, cut his ADP in half if he does get the starting job. If we see Rico Dowdle go out there and get clear-cut RB1 snaps with the first team offense over these next few weeks, he could rise up draft boards in a hurry because, yeah, this offense, as long as Dak Prescott has been healthy, one of the highest scoring groups in the league, if not the highest scoring group like they were last year, certainly want to be in on their RB1, especially when they have shown some legit pass catching ability like Dowdle. Last season, he had top 10 marks in both yards per reception and yards per route run. So just 113 career touches. But again, when we're comparing him against old man Zeke, Royce Freeman is hurt with a groin, and Deuce Vaughn is hurt with a hamstring, certainly seems like all things are pointing up for Dowdle right now. But yeah, just praying that again, we don't get Pirine or Khalil Herbert or Dameon Pierce or any of these guys messing up these backfields. I mean, could be good for those bag holders, don't get me wrong. But for Dowdle's case, please, let's keep things as they are. Greg, again, those are the two main, I think, Cincinnati and Dallas RB battles because we're really focused on getting invested into those probably high scoring offenses. But quite a few other RB2 battles going on. We got Philly between Wolf Shipley and Kenneth Gainwell. Already talked about Tyron Tracy versus Eric Gray with the Giants. We got Ray Davis and Ty Johnson in Buffalo, Deneric Prince, Clyde Edwards-Helaire in Kansas City, Marshawn Lloyd, A.J. Dillon in Green Bay, Herbert versus Roschon in Chicago, Jordan Mason versus now injured Elijah Mitchell in San Fran, and then maybe even Trey Benson versus Amari DiMercado in Arizona, amongst even others. So again, I'll throw those situations out there, but is there a late round RB2 or two that you think is going undervalued in drafts at the moment based on their potential high-end handcuff upside?
I think if we're talking about large field drafts, like Underdog Best Ball Mania, something like that, I
Sure.
think Jordan Mason is someone who is going largely undrafted, and when he does get drafted, he's going in the absolute final round. Like you mentioned, Elijah Mitchell injured. He has a really rough injury history. Seems like he's always getting banged up. I'm not worried about Christian McCaffrey's calf. I think he's going to be fine, but he's had a lot of touches
Yeah.
in his career, and if something were to happen there, we've heard Kyle Shanahan speak recently about Jordan Mason. Really likes him a lot, and this is kind of a turn from last year when he was asked about the RB2. He's like, yeah, it's Elijah Mitchell. Duh. Like, stop asking me about it. We love Elijah Mitchell. And then now he's asked about it, and he says, well, nothing against Elijah Mitchell, but we really like JP, which is Jordan Mason. And yeah, there's just like so much upside if he's able to get into a role there. You're more than likely looking at a 0 from him, but the upside, if like he's absolute boomer bust. He either gives you a
Yeah.
0 or he's going to give you so many points in fantasy, and it's going to be super super hard to beat any team that's in your pod that has Jordan Mason, especially if it's something that happens at the beginning of the season.
And guess what? We've seen years where if you don't have Christian McCaffrey on your team, it's going to be super hard to try to win that league as it is. So if you already don't have Christian McCaffrey and you want to try to further benefit from what you need to happen, which is McCaffrey going down or at least not being the usual baller, you're getting that kind of contingent upside with someone like Jordan Mason in the final rounds of drafts where, let's face it, you're picking between, the lowest of the low because they're available at that spot anyway. So fun, arbitrary, cutoff, small sample size stat here. Over the past 2 seasons, all running backs with at least 75 carries. Number 1 in yards per carry, Devin Achane. Number 2, JP, Jordan Mason himself. So really has made the most out of his opportunities. And Greg, I know if people haven't just maybe followed your account super close, you've thrown out there a couple times like you actually do keep, percentages of reliability from these coaches in terms of their workloads and injury reports and other things of that nature. So the Kyle Shanahan statements, because you said it, like they were asking him last November, I think it was, about these, backup RBs. And he was like, the numbers are what some people care about, but we look more into that. Elijah is our number 2. Now he's kind of shifting. I mean, has Shanahan, at least in terms of the depth chart, usually been pretty reliable? Because, he's also the same guy who told us, who knows if we're even going to be alive here on the next Sunday. So what have you noticed from Shanahan in terms of reliability over the years?
Yeah, he's super reliable across the board. He's one of 5 head coaches who have at least an 80% reliability rating in all 4 categories of
Nice.
injury, depth chart, transactions, and usage workload. So yeah, whenever Kyle Shanahan says something, like we're pretty much always believing that.
I'm curious, who are the other 4? You said, again, across all of them, 80% or higher, Kyle Shanahan, and who else?
Yeah, it's Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Dan
Okay.
Campbell, Todd Bowles, and Nick Sirianni.
Nice. See, that is great stuff, Greg. Separating yourself from, again, all of us other just casual fantasy analysts over here. So kind of adds up. I mean, I've always thought Shanny and McVay, Dan Campbell seem like pretty trustworthy guys. So again, good to see that over an extended sample. So again, mentioned those RB2 battles going on. Ray Davis in Buffalo is another one that I'm pretty interested in here because I have noticed that James Cook, he's gotten some praise, but I've also seen several beat reports, just going out there saying drops have continued to be an issue, ball security. And as we've seen with Sean McDermott, man, he's not afraid to go ahead and bench James Cook after just one mistake. So Ty Johnson has been dealing with, I believe, a hamstring injury throughout camp. It's for sure a lower body issue. And Ray Davis, accordingly, man, has been getting a lot of runs. So want to be careful about not getting too carried away with a day 3 pick. But from what you've, just kind of been reading and observing about Buffalo, do you think Ray Davis has an actual chance to, again, kind of solidify at least this RB2 job ahead of week 1?
Yeah, I think he has a chance at the RB2 job. He's had his own ball security issues in training camp, which they asked Joe Brady about, the offensive coordinator, and he was like, "Yeah, we don't like that. You got to hold on to the ball." And then he also made a comment about he was asked about James Cook, like, can you trust him as a short yardage back? And he talked about how James Cook, put on some more muscle this year, got stronger. They gave him a ton of touches last season, and they at least Joe Brady says that they view him as someone that they're comfortable giving the ball to in short yardage situations, that he can give you that yard that he needs. What I am scared about is not just Josh Allen rushing, but also
Mhm.
Curtis Samuel. Like, we
Yeah.
know Joe Brady likes to use Curtis Samuel out of the backfield, and they have him there now, and he's been getting work in the backfield in training camp. So it's not just the RB2 that we have to worry about. It's the QB1 and the wide receiver one that we have to worry about stealing some of these touches.
Hey, you came to the right show to, put some Curtis Samuel propaganda out there. So we appreciate you for that. And let's go ahead and talk about these Buffalo wide receivers. Because again, Keon Coleman, borderline first round pick, just literally, just missed the cut over there behind Xavier Leggett. But, he's been the one we've been forced to draft first in more fantasy drafts than not. But at the same time, I mean, mentioned kind of earlier in our rapid fire news rundown, Matt Collins, got brought there for a reason. The MVS is the Chase Claypools of the world. I understand these are mid receivers, but just their skill sets and the way Buffalo might want to use them. I mean, I don't know about you, Greg, but again, based on the just archetypes of players we have, based on what we've heard out of Buffalo, I feel the most secure about Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakur to a lesser extent because of some of the 2 wide receiver sets. But for me, it's Curtis 1, Khalil number 2 in terms of just certainty that these guys are going to be heavily involved in the passing game. I'm sure Keon will come on. It just might be a little rough to start the season. So if you had to put a chip on one of these Bills wide receivers, keeping the cost in mind, would it be Curtis Samuel?
Yeah, it's absolutely Curtis Samuel. He has the history with Joe Brady, and Joe Brady said he wishes he had nothing but Curtis Samuels in Buffalo. So that's pretty nice to hear if you're buying Curtis Samuel this season. And just a really, really good, reliable wide receiver who you can play in any spot. You can play him on the inside, you can play him on the outside, you can play him out of the backfield like Joe Brady did down in Carolina. So feel very, very good about Curtis Samuel. Like you mentioned, Khalil Shakir. They asked Joe Brady, what gives you the confidence that Khalil Shakir will be a good wide receiver for you this season. He said the last 10 games of last season, they really love the continuous improvement that they've seen out of him. They love Mac Hollins' ability to block for the run game. We saw the Bills run a ton last season when they switched from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator. And Keon Coleman, like, is there any other wide receiver that has a wider range of outcomes this year than him? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends with like 450 yards, and I wouldn't be shocked if he ends with like 1,100 yards. He's somebody that seems like there are a lot of red flags in his profile. There's also some green flags as far as like how well he matches up with what Josh Allen does, right? All the improvisation that Josh Allen does on the football field when plays break down and guys are just like running around and he's fighting them and just YOLO ball up in the air, go up and get it, and Keon Coleman fits that pretty well. So maybe it's something where we just see it kind of slowly develop throughout the season. I think it'll be key of where are they going to play Keon Coleman. Like if they do the big slot thing, that's a lot better for him. If they just like purely run him at X, where conventional wisdom says he's probably not going to do the best there, like just solely at the X position. That might be a little tougher. I'd be very, very nervous to take him in redraft. I know that. In best ball, I don't want zero exposure to Keon Coleman. I'll just like cry myself to sleep every night if he ends up hitting in a really big way. And like we can't say with 100% certainty like this guy is absolutely gonna bust.
Yeah.
And we can't say with absolute certainty that Keon Coleman is the Bills wide receiver one. Again, that range is so big. He could end up as the most productive wide receiver for them. He could end up as like the third or fourth most productive wide receiver for the Bills this year. So I'm exercising some caution, but I'm exercising caution both ways. Like I'm trying to make sure that I have a little bit of him in best ball this year.
And I think that's smart when we look at a Bills offense that has been high scoring, that has, in most people's opinion, the number 2 quarterback in the NFL. They're going to get their production. We're just a little bit confused about where it's going to go. And accordingly, all these guys are priced as wide receiver 4s and wide receiver 5s who are destined to rise up the ranks once we get some more clarity. So I know these are, the more ambiguous situations in fantasy. It's scary to target them, kind of like the Dolphins backfield last season, but embracing that uncertainty and again, buying guys closer to their floor than the ceilings that we know exist in this passing game might be a good move. So I'm a Greg, been preferring Curtis Samuel and probably even Khalil Shakir at cost, but would not be completely out on Keon Coleman or anyone for that matter that we have not seen play in a single NFL snap yet. So Greg, great stuff. Final thing before we get out of here, man, kudos to you. You were all over Puka Nacua last year. I believe you said you were the 4th highest, drafter in terms of just total getting him in the best ball mania last season. So kudos to you and your bank account. Do you have another round 18 plus dart that you feel really good about this season? No pressure, man. Just gotta, give us this year's Puka Nacua.
Well, for the record, I feel like I've been the conductor of the Jalen McMillan train going months back. I know he's not an 18th round pick anymore, but I was hyping him up because of Coach Speak when he was going in the 18th round. But I'll give you, can I give you 3 just like real quick in the 18th round because I think there are 3 really good picks right now. One, you mentioned earlier, Tucker Kraft for redraft, absolute nightmare for like any Packers wide receiver or tight end. But for best ball, the Packers love Tucker Kraft. They love Luke Musgrave as well, but they love Tucker Kraft also. So they're going to spread the ball around. Matt LaFleur said that he loves the fact that they have so many great receiving options there. Defenses have no idea, which guy is going to get the ball on a given week, and the Packers don't know which guy is going to get the ball really on a given week. So I really love him as a last round dart in best ball. And then there are two Washingtons that I really like in the final round. They're both wide receivers. One is Malik Washington in Miami. I believe he has the talent to win that wide receiver 3 job. We haven't seen Miami run a lot of 11 personnel in the past, but they also didn't have the personnel to run 11 personnel in the past. And they have a real yak threat now in Malik Washington, very productive at Virginia in college last season. Really good wide receiver, great hands, good route runner. Matt Harmon likes him a lot. And then the other is Casey Washington, wide receiver who's been drafted in probably, 0.1% of underdog best ball drafts. Wide receiver for Atlanta. Rondale Moore just went down with a season-ending injury. And Casey Washington, it's, be between probably him and Ray McLeod for a wide receiver 3 job. Ray McLeod, more of a slot guy. Casey Washington, more of an outside receiver. But there is a runway for Casey Washington to make some noise in Atlanta. He's been having a good camp. Darnell Mooney, is he good? Probably not. Yeah, I think there's a potential runway there for him to make some noise this season.
Especially people going out there on DraftKings where you get up to the 20 rounds, and my God, it gets tough to find guys, when you get into that point in drafts. Malik Washington, Casey Washington, Tucker Kraft, guys maybe you should be taking an extra long gander at. I know I have been tailing you quite a bit on the Malik Washington call. Just a guy that throughout the offseason, when I was almost trying to research other wide receivers, I kept seeing his name pop up at the top of some of these, more advanced metrics. And you mentioned Matt Harmon liking him. He's a guy that Dane Brugler is also a fan of. Actually gave him a 3rd round grade in his beast, had him ranked right behind Xavier Legette and Jalen Polk. So, Tyreek and Waddle going to do their things, but God forbid, they miss a little bit of time. Could see Malik, going up at the depth chart in a hurry. We'll see about OBJ, but getting a bit longer in the tooth and currently on the PUP list himself, although not considered serious. So, Greg, thank you so much for the time, man. And again, thank you for everything you do. People can find you at CoachSpeakIndex, and you have your Patreon as well. So anything else you want to get off your chest, my friend?
Dude, thanks for the invite. This was a lot of fun. And let's go win some titles this year.
Let's go win some freaking titles. That's what it's all about after all. So I want to thank you guys again for tuning into the Fantasy Life show. I know we wrapped up wide receiver week, but next week, truly getting into, the grind of just draft strategy from each and every, angle that we can find. So early, middle, late draft position. And of course, we got some preseason takeaways that we will continue to break down as well. So great stuff. Thank you to Greg, and thank you to you for listening again. So for Greg, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I am Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life show. And until next time, take care, everybody.